Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar with the title Challenges and Opportunities for the European Insect Sector, taking stock of the recent EU regulatory developments in the insect novel foods field. My name is Maximilian Beiter, and I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager at the International Platform of Insects for Food and Feed, better known as IPIFF. Before we get fully started, allow me to say a few words about our organization. As you can see on these slides, IPIFF represents the interests of the European insect producing sector towards the EU institutions. Our members, counting 83 today, are majority active in the production of insects, coming from 25 countries, mostly in Europe. In addition to insect producers, here in the red and green box, our association also includes academic actors, here in the purple box, as well as actors who are not producing insects, but are present in the insect value chain, such as producer and developers for equipment and technology. As EU umbrella organization for the insect sector, we play the role of interface between producing operators on the ground and EU policymakers by contributing to shape EU policies and regulatory standards for our sector. We also strive to support insect producing actors by explaining legislation. That's precisely what we will strive to do today through our webinar, for which more than 200 participants have signed up. But before we continue, allow me to leave the floor to Christian Baertsch, who will speak today's introductory words. Christian is the co-founder and CEO of SANTE Insect Food, a Swiss company developing and producing insect-based food products across Europe. Since 2013, Christian has been a main driver for promoting insects as food in Europe and was strongly involved in changing the Swiss law to legalize insects as food in Switzerland. Christian is furthermore a member of IPIFF's executive committee, where he is in charge of communication. Christian, the floor is yours.
Perfect, thank you, Max. Distinguished officials from European and national institutions, honorable representatives from stakeholders, organizations, non-governmental organizations, academia, and actors active in the insect food production and in other food sectors. Dear colleagues and friends, good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this IPIFF webinar entitled Challenges and Opportunities for European Insect Food Sector, taking stock of the recent EU regulation developments in the insect novel foods field. With the entry into force of 2 insect novel food authorisations earlier this year, covering dried yellow mealworm and frozen dried migratory locust respectively, and more recently, the approval by EU member states of 2 additional insect novel food products, namely frozen and dried house crickets and frozen and dried yellow mealworm, 2021 has been a very successful year for the EU insect food sector. In the scope of this webinar, we wish to shed some light on the challenges and opportunities linked to these developments for our sector. The mentioned developments represent milestones for our sector that will motivate us to continue developing this young industry further and allowing us to provide sustainable food solutions for Europe and beyond. It is very important to highlight that we were not only able to reach these milestones through the valuable support of our stakeholders in many fields, including, but not limited to, EU policymakers, academia, and business associations. It is a pleasure that we will be joined today by speakers representing this diverse group of stakeholders that have accompanied IPIFF in reaching these very important milestones. These experts will provide an institutional and market perspective on the main theme of our webinar, but also answer questions which you might bring up in the Q&A box of this event. Wrapping up, I would like to thank you for joining our event and to express my gratitude to all the speakers present for having accepted our invitation. I personally look forward to a fruitful dialogue throughout this event, and I look very much forward to seeing you in one of the future IPIFF events. I now pass the floor back to my colleague, Max.
Many thanks for these warm welcoming words, Christian. I would like to join you in thanking today's speakers for having accepted our invitation. Rafael Perez from the European Commission will open today's round of presentations and will then be followed by Domenico Azzollini, who will speak on behalf of the European Food Safety Authority. Bastien, Rabastens, who is an insect producer in France, will continue and speak in his capacity as chairman of the IPIFF working group Food Safety and Consumers Information. Finally, Sebastian Emig, who is representing the European Snacks Association, will close our discussion by speaking on behalf of this association. As you can see, we are joined by a diverse group of great speakers today. However, we have also an exciting audience that has dialed in today, ranging from actors active in insect production, national and EU policymakers, academic actors, and non-governmental associations. In a few seconds, I'll leave the floor to our keynote speaker, Rafael Perez. But before doing that, I would like to inform you about some practical rules. You will have the opportunity to ask questions. To this end, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. And when doing so, please state your name and affiliation. We'll have a short 5-minute Q&A session after each presentation, during which you can address your questions to the preceding speaker. At the end of the last presentation, we will have another 10-minute Q&A session, where you will have the opportunity to address your question to any of the previous speakers. Should we not be able to answer your question due to time constraints, we kindly invite you to forward them to our general email address info@ipiff.org, and we'll do our best to get an answer by passing it over to the concerned speaker. Last but not least, the recording of this event will be made publicly available on our YouTube channel. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Rafael Perez. Rafael is a veterinarian by profession. After having worked as a veterinary inspector at the Department of Public Health in Spain for 13 years, he joined in 2002 the Food and Veterinary Office of DG SANTE, which is based in Dublin. In 2010, he moved to the DG SANTE headquarters, so to Brussels, where he started to work as a policy officer in the area of food additives and food enzymes. In 2016, he moved to the field novel foods and became later a team leader. Rafael has been very closely involved in the first insect novel food authorisations. It can therefore safely be said that there's no better keynote speaker than Rafael to guide us through the latest and future developments of insect novel food authorisations. Rafael, I'm handing over the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Max. So good morning to everyone. So hope everyone stay safe and healthy. So first of all, it is a pleasure to be here today. And to start with, I would like to thank very much, the IPIFF, for inviting me to this webinar. So although I have been, indicated by Mr. Christian Baertsch, so I would like also to congratulate the insect business operators and IPIFF as well, because indeed this year might be considered as a kind of milestone, because insects have been a few insects have already been authorized for the first time in the European Union under the novel food regulation. Indeed, there are also others, important issues in the context of the definition of RAS. This is the collaboration, I mean, between the IPIFF and the other sectors from the algae and the yeast sectors in the context of supporting the EU protein production. But now let's focus on my presentation. So my presentation will be structured into 4 parts. To give you an idea, first of all, the first part is about the former and the current novel food regulation. The second part will be dedicated to the transitional measure. What do we mean by that and what has been achieved so far? The third part will be focus on data protection, because there's still some misunderstanding about the meaning of data protection and what might be the impact on this and what we can do as a food business, in that case, as an insect, food business operator, if I can, whether I can use it or not use it. And finally, a bit of information in the context of the new e-submission platform. Okay, let's start with the first. Hopefully we can, yes. Now the first part of the presentation is the former the current novel food regulation. Indeed, as you remember, the definition of novel food indeed is a product which has not been consumed to a significant degree, before 15 May 1997. Why this cutoff date? Because it was the day where the regulation of the novel food in 1997 entered into force at that time. So the regulation at the time was adopted, thinking, thinking about, the GM products plus, of course, other, let's say, innovative products. But the former novel food regulation clearly have a request at that time where the Commission has to make a report 5 years later after the adoption of the regulation to indicate, what's going on, in terms of the implementation. And indeed, their report indicated a number of deficiencies, which really, led the Commission to start thinking about, a new novel food regulation. Indeed, we have, following our internal procedure, we had to carry out an impact assessment. As you know, the conclusion at that time was that indeed the novel food regulation need to be reviewed, taking into account consideration from the scientific and technological developments. You remember that under the former novel food regulation, all the requests had to be submitted to a member state, whereas under the current novel food regulation it has to be submitted to the Commission. But we will come back to that later on. One of the important things is that under the former novel food regulation in 1997, there were uncertainties about whether a whole insect could or could not be considered as falling within the scope of the novel food regulation. Because of the wording on one particular novel food category at that time, it was basically the ingredient isolated from animals, as of course for foods and food ingredient obtained by breeding practices and having a history of safe food use. Indeed, we have, let's say, different views from different member states. I mean, the insect industry is very fully aware of the situation, whether they have, in some member states, I mean, the insects, whole insects were not allowed because they were considered novel food, whereas in other member states, they did not have that view, and therefore that product were already on the market. So in October 2020, in particular on the 1st of October, I mean, the European Court of Justice, make a judgment. We clearly indicated that, I mean, that the food consisting of whole animals which are intended to be consumed as such, I mean, basically the whole insect do not fall within the scope of the novel food regulation. Indeed, it was it was very important for everyone because it was clearly demonstrated, that some member states had that view. In that way, I mean, that product, were not illegal on that market. Now we are moving on to the new regulation, which was, let's say, or became applicable as of 1st January 2018. Basically, they share the same view as the former novel food regulation, meaning to guarantee the effective function of the internal market but at the same time, we had to provide a high level of protection of human health and consumer interests. The definition, of course, of novel food has not changed at all. Another important issue is that indeed, I mean, this novel food regulation really promotes, innovative foods, and in particular that these innovative fruits, including insects, are a key driver of the European Green Deal, and of course, on the Commission Farm to Fork strategy. Indeed, that novel food regulation were the view that balance the EU citizen expectations at the same time while promoting, innovation. But one of the most important things is in this upstream communication between, the innovators and regulators, because sometimes, always the legislation goes behind, about innovation, and it's important to get this information, in advance in order to clearly establish the regulatory pathway. In that case, we consider it a win-win situation. Well, as you know, under the former novel food regulation, we have 4 categories because, later on the product considered as falling within the GMO regulation or GM product at that time, there was a separate piece of regulation which really covered all GM products. But the new regulation actually establishes, 10 novel food categories. Here I highlighted, the most important ones, but indeed, we're talking about here, it's insects, which indeed, come from animal or their parts. Very quick about the authorization process, just to remind everyone how this authorization process, works in practice. So we swap from the decentralized authorization process to a centralized one, meaning that in the past, an application has to be submitted to a member state, whereas right now it has to be, we centralize the authorization process, and an application has to be submitted to the Commission. And then, when the Commission receives, the application, it has to verify the validity of the application. And then there are 2 possibilities. One is, the application is considered valid. We had to publish the summary of the application, which is available, of course, on our website. Because under the online, e-submission platform, all the member states are fully aware of the applications, and there are 2 possibilities, whether EFSA might or might not be consulted, Normally, by default, when of course may pose a safety concern to human health, EFSA is consulted, and the Commission makes a mandate to EFSA, where EFSA has, legally speaking, 9 months to perform the evaluation. But indeed, EFSA also, on the basis of the novel food provision, they can stop the clock at any time if they consider that additional information is needed. After the opinion has been delivered by EFSA, the Commission has 7 months to present the draft opinion to the Standing Committee. And when the committee gives a favorable opinion, we proceed to update the union list. In case EFSA is not consulted, for example, from change specification or condition of use or labeling which does not have an impact on human health, in that case, the Commission has 7 months to present the draft authorization, the draft authorization proposal to the committee. And again, if the Standing Committee gives a favorable opinion, in that case, we proceed to update the union list. This is when it comes to what we call novel food applications and Article 10, which means basically most of the insects. For traditional foods from third countries, this is one of the, let's say, big achievements as one of the deficiencies or identify in the former novel food regulation, because any traditional food was treated in the same way as a normal one. This is a sort of, shortcut in terms of the authorization process, meaning that instead of an application, we call it a notification. In a way, the dossier has to be submitted to the Commission, same procedure. We have to verify the validity of the notification. And now the big difference in comparison with Article 10 is as soon as the dossier is valid, we send it, for a evaluation to both, to the member state and EFSA. So both have equal footing. And they have, instead of 9-month period, instead only 4 months. And within that case, they have to indicate whether there are objections or no objections. If there are no objections, neither by EFSA or by member states or by both, in that case, the Commission will proceed with the authorization and update the union list. As you can see, there is no need to go to comitology here. But of course, if there are objections, because either by any of them, the member state of EFSA, in that case, the Commission will refuse the authorization. They have to provide a legal act, it's a decision refusing the authorization, but the applicant still have another chance to submit an application. We don't call it anymore a notification, it's an application under different article. We call Article 16 of the Novel Food Regulation, in which in that case, the applicant has to address all the safety concerns raised during the 4-month period. And in that case, only EFSA will address these safety concerns. EFSA in that case has 6 months instead of 9 months, because this is, as I said, this is a shortcut. And after EFSA deliver the opinion, the Commission will have 3 months to present it at the Standing Committee. Again, in that case, we had to go through comitology as well. We have received very few notification for insect as a traditional food from third country, but we will come back to that later on. Now we're talking about the second part of the presentation is the transitional measures. As you know, indeed, it was very much supported by the judgment European Court of Justice. In a way, what we are saying this transitional measure is it is something which was not considered novel food at that time, but it is considered novel food in the context of the new novel food regulation. The product can continue to be on the market, but there, of course, it is subject to, some specific conditions. In the context of insect, indeed, basically the product has to be lawfully placed on the market before 1st January 2018. And the second condition is that an application for the authorization of the insect species which was already on the market had to be submitted, by 1st January 2019. This is, the date we was already indicated in the implementing regulation. But indeed, if the data protection, for example, we will also explain to you later on about the data protection is granted in one of them, after submitting the application and no one else, apply for the same insect species, only the applicant who got the authorization and the data protection will be able to market that product. And the other ones which are on the market, they have to be withdrawn. The current situation right now is that indeed, as already indicated, by Mr. Christian Barnes, we already, authorized 2 novel foods and the other 2 are in the pipeline. But right now we have 9 applications which are under the risk assessment. Probably my colleague Domenico from EFSA will give you more details. But because these 9 applications were already submitted, by 1st January 2019, will mean these are subject to these transitional measures. These applications, in a way, 5, were submitted in a way by 1st January 2019, and 4 actually says, I think they are submitted after that one. So here, sorry, no, that's a wrong one. So here 9 applications, but indeed, 5 were submitted only by 1st January 2019. The species submitted at that time was, Alphitorius deaperinum. DP means, data protection, that the applicant had requested data protection. The second species was Grillo decidilatus as well, with also the applicant requested data protection. There are another species with this Tenebrio molitor, where the applicant did not request data protection, meaning non-data protection. There is another insect species with the Apis mellifera male pupae, with this also non-data protection, and also the final application is Hermetia luciens larvae, with also the applicant did not request data protection. This is at the moment, this is 5 applications which are at the moment under the risk assessment. I mean, talking about applications submitted, by 1st January 2019, although there are other 4 applications under risk assessment, but these applications were submitted after, 1st January 2019. So therefore, they are not subject to transitional measures. In addition to that, we still have 3 applications where the Commission consulted EFSA in the context of Article 6.2 of the implementing provisions. That means that the Commission asked EFSA to verify whether these dossiers, contain all the information which are prescribed in the implementing rules and the novel food regulation. And at that time, we received 3. One is on Akita domesticus, where the applicant did not apply for data protection, Locusta migratoria as well, and Akita domesticus. That's the 3 of them, where there is no data protection. Because we have to, the Commission has the obligation to verify the validity of the applications. So far, the Commission may terminate the procedure if the considered application is not valid, or because, for example, there is a negative EFSA opinion. In that case, we have the obligation to make the list of such application publicly available. The provision to terminate the procedure is Article 10.6 of the Novel Food Regulation. This is the link where you can see all the list of the application which has been terminated. In the context of insects, in August of this year, we terminated, we adopted a legal act terminating the procedure for the authorization of this particular insect species, Schistocerca gregaria, because the applicant did not provide information as requested by the Commission, and after requesting several times, the applicant did not come back to the Commission anymore, and therefore the Commission decided to terminate the procedure. And therefore, because in that one there was no other application, that Schistocerca gregaria can no longer be on the market unless as an application can be submitted and is eventually authorized, might in a future be listed and therefore marketed in the European Union, but that particular species can no longer be on the market. Indeed, as already explained, I'm not going to insist so much, but this is a very good year because so far EFSA has already delivered 4 opinions on insects, which are published, 2 authorizations so far, one on dry tenebrio molitol larvae, and the second one very recently about the frozen, dried, and powdered form of Locusta migratoria. The other 2, which is in the process of being adopted by the Commission, received a favorable opinion by the committee in November of this year. And this in the context of another, the tenebrio molitol larvae in different forms, as well the different forms of Akita domesticus. So, in terms of confidentiality and data protection, so I think people tend to confuse these 2 concepts, which are totally different. Indeed, I mean, the confidentiality can be requested, by the applicant for the dossiers, but indeed the confidentiality provision had changed since the transparency regulation was adopted as of 27 March of this year, and now. In the context of confidentiality, it was before the transparency regulation. It was within the Commission remit to assess confidentiality, and after this, let's say, as of 27 March of this year, it is EFSA who has to perform the assessment of the confidentiality. There are indeed some exceptions with this. First of all, I mean the traditional foods. And of course, a novel food application where EFSA opinion is not requested. In that case, we had to perform the assessment of the confidentiality. On data protection, basically here, quickly. So on data protection, indeed, also is also requested by the applicant as well, but indeed there are 3 conditions where the applicant has to meet. The first one is they have to demonstrate that this is the owner of the studies. The second one, they have to, to demonstrate they have the exclusive right of referring to this data, because in a number of cases, I mean, companies are not able to perform, for example, toxicological data or other studies. They had to be outsourced to external lab. But this, one way of demonstrating that is to provide the contractual agreement between the applicant and the laboratory, and in that contractual agreement is a clear indication that that data cannot be shared. And the third one is EFSA has to indicate in its opinion that without that data, they couldn't have made the evaluation. So the first and the second condition is for the Commission, and the third one is for EFSA. But indeed, the applicant has to meet the 3 conditions. Otherwise, they will not get data protection. This data protection can only be granted for 5 years and cannot be renewed by any means. So it's 5 years and then it will become generic. And that means that only the applicant holding this authorization will be able to market that product for 5 years. This does not mean that other applicant cannot submit an application for the same novel food with different data. Okay, that's perfectly feasible. And the data protection does not apply to traditional foods from third countries. In a way, as you know, the Union list on novel food clearly consists of 2 tables. The first one we will show you an example on insect is about the condition of use, whether the novel food may be used. Basically, we list the categories in which the novel food may be used, and also the maximum level, if any. Also, we indicate specific labeling requirements, if there is any specific labeling requirement, in addition to what the requirements are under the FIC regulation. Other requirements, for example, if there is a need in the context of post-market monitoring program, and indeed, there will be the last column of data protection where necessary. And the table 2 will indicate the specification. This is an example of, for example, how the table 1 look like. This is the Tenebre monitor. We will list it, the specified food categories. Here, there are no maximum level because it can be taken as a snack. Therefore, I mean, it can be used as a whole, and there is no maximum level. But when it's used as an ingredient in different categories, we can put the levels, where this product can be used. This is what I mean by additional specific labeling requirement, because there is an obligation that we need to designate the name of the novel food. And therefore, there is an obligation by the operator to indicate how it should be in the product as well. And in case, of course, there are some issues in the context of allergenicity, either for under the primary sensitization, or because there are cross-reactivity to other foods, we will indicate it here. There are no other requirements, but indeed this applicant, for example, apply for data protection, and we indicate this in the data protection when the authorization was given, 22nd June 2021, and when this authorization will finalize 22nd June 2026. And this is the name of the company who will be able to market that product on the market. In the context of specification, for us it's important to define the novel food. We then, I mean, here how it's presented. We make a reference about the taxonomy of the insect as well. So in that case, we don't indicate that any part has to be removed. For example, contrary to what we indicate is on Locusta migratoria, where the wings and leg has to be removed due to the issue of constipation, but the high level of chitin. And also we indicate that indeed the 24-hour fasting period is required before killing the insect. Sorry. And the characteristics and the composition in terms is important. We try to establish some ranges. Heavy metals, the mycotoxin, and also the microbiological criteria. So if anyone, for example, that after this 5-year period want to play the synergies on the market, they have to meet the conditional use, or they have to comply with the conditional use and with the specification, exactly in the same way that is here. Any deviation from that is mean that will require an extension of the authorization. Finally, very quick about the e-submission platform. So we have already created, there was an online submission at the time of the new regulation on novel food was, or became applicable at that time in January 2018, but because of the transparency regulation, let's say that submission platform has been improved. And this is what we call the e-submission food chain platform, where many regulated products, had to submit an application to the Commission through that system. So in the past, we call it what the FSS cap, and now under the transparency regulation, we have a new system. But in the sense, it's pretty much the same, but of course with some differences. All applicants must submit this application notification through the system, and indeed it has a lot of information and user guidance, in the links which are provided here. And this slide basically is to explain to you that the IPIFF already indicated to me there are some, let's say, potential food business operator that might think that they might have some, let's say, agreements on business with the applicant, have already, got an authorization and data protection. So if any food business operator wants to market a product which is already authorized and is data protected, there is a possibility that they have to make a kind of contractual agreement with the authorized applicant, but indeed the subsequent applicant, they need to submit an application to the Commission. You can see in the system as a novel food, it's in the drop-down menu, as a novel food authorization, it's a modification of an already authorized novel food, and they will pop up, which the current one which are authorized, dry tenebrio molitor larva, or for example, of the Locusta migratoria. That here they need to provide, contractual agreement that between the initial applicant and the subsequent applicant. But indeed, the subsequent applicant has to comply exactly with the conditional use and the specifications. Otherwise, they could also submit an application if they have an agreement with the applicant to use that data. But indeed, if they want to extend the use and so on, in that case, we need to send it to EFSA for a safety evaluation. Finally, I'm not going to go into detail. It's this only information for the participants about, a lot of the information of the e-submission system, about the confidentiality. So there are a number of videos here, and in the next one, where they explain the issue of confidentiality and data. And that's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael, for this great presentation. I'm sure your detailed explanation have contributed to clarifying most questions that our audience might have had on the subjects you just talked about. However, I have seen in the Q&A box a few questions. One of them actually touches upon the legal situations of insects in Spain. The participants asked if eatable insects are actually legal in Spain. Would you be able to comment on that? I know it's kind of a national, touches upon the national subjects here a bit, but as we know, harmonization is something that the EU strives for.
Okay, thank you, Max. So the question, yes, I understand the question. So there are right now two insect species, which is Tenebrio molitor and Locusta migratoria, which are authorized under the novel food regulation. These are the two insect species which can be marketed in the whole European Union. These are the only two insects right now. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I was indicated that there are a number of insect species which were lawfully placed in some member states before 1st January 2018. based on the judgment of the European Court of Justice, those insect species can continue on the market, provided that they submitted an application, for the authorization by 1st January 2019. So the question in Spain is, well, there might be some insect species. I already indicated in my presentation that there are a number of insect species for which an application has been received, on Akita, on Alfitorius de Aperino, and Hermetia. So there are 4 or 5 insect species. If none of them are there, they cannot be on the market. That is the current situation.
Great, many thanks, Rafael, for having answered that question in detail. We have another question from Sebastian Ozna, who's asking, to what extent do novel food applications with no data protection submitted before January 2019 from other companies can be leveraged to benefit from the transitional measure?
Well, the situation a bit, because indeed, the operators were fully aware in advance, because about the requirements of submitting an application, because in the framework regulation there was like a period up to 2020, but we shortened the period of the transitional measure by, in terms of submitting an application by 1 year, because we want to give legal certainty about, submitting applications. The current situation is that we have like 5 or 6 species so far, and submitted under this Windows periods, let's put it that way, by 1st January 2019. If for whatever reason some of them do not fly, meaning that we don't get a positive EFSA opinion, or they are or those which are under the validity by the Commission, are not considered valid, this product, I'm afraid, they have to be withdrawn from the market.
Many thanks, Rafael. We have one more question coming from Sarah Lewis. She's asking, can generic companies develop insect products during data protection? For example, can a company have a Tenebrio monitor product ready to be put on the market in June, to be precise, she's asking because this is important, on the 23rd of June 2026, using Acronutus data. Acronutus is the company that is holding data protection here, right? So she's asking, in this case, does it mean that Fair Insects loses out as its data protection will have another 7 or so months to go?
So, if I understood correctly the question, correct me, Max, if I'm wrong. Indeed, any operator can, after that date, 22nd June 2027, any operator, because this data protection period will be over, and any operator, and this means that this authorization will become generic. Okay. So it means any food business operator can benefit from that particular authorization, but the only, let's say, the only in inverted comma condition, they have to comply with the conditional use and the specifications. Now, in terms of whether they can use the data, scientific data provided by the applicant, well, even this data is protected for 5 years. Okay. But indeed, we have a different provisions, for access to document and so on. Well, indeed, it's up to the applicant whether they can, agree or not to share that data.
Yeah, great. Many thanks for that. Looking at the time, I think we should move on to the next presentation, but you will have the possibility to raise your questions as well later at the end of this webinar during our Q&A session there. We'll continue now with the next speaker who will speak about the lessons learned from the assessment of insect novel food products. Who could speak better about that then the scientific officer from EFSA covering risk assessment of novel foods. Domenico Azzollini holds a PhD in food science and has years of experience in science as well as in processing of insects as food. He's an author of more than 10 peer-reviewed articles in the fields of edible insects, 3D printing, and innovative food technologies. He has recently co-authored EFSA's scientific opinion on the safety of frozen and dried formulations from migratory locusts as novel foods. Domenico, we are looking very much forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, the whole community for the invitation. Indeed, I'll be giving on behalf of EFSA this presentation on mainly two things. One is the challenges that we had to face for assessing the insects as novel food, and the lessons that we learned during the risk assessment. I will start by giving a bit more info on what my colleague Rafael from Commission just introduced on the framework and on the amount, so as to say, of insects that are currently under assessment and their types. So this presentation will be a bit more, of course, scientific than regulatory. So to move to the first slide, you see here in this slide that EFSA has a total at the moment of 17 dossiers. 4 are currently under the suitability check. So we call the suitability check those dossiers that are yet to receive an official mandate from the Commission for the risk assessment, but still EFSA has to evaluate, before going into the risk assessment, needs to evaluate the soundness and the scientificness or the scientific profile of the opinions of the dossier, and also their completeness, of course, in terms of data. Then moving into what we currently have under risk assessment, there are 9. And then finally, and likely, we've been able to adopt in the last almost 1 year 4 opinions, at least from our standpoint. You see, they vary across different species. We have adult type of species, we have larvae, and we also have pupae. In particular, you see the most predominant species that we have received and or that are part of the assessments is Locusta, the Acheta domesticus. In fact, we have 4 dossiers. 1 is already adopted, and 3 are under suitability check. And this is soon followed by Tenebre molitor, actually on the same side. In fact, there are 2 opinions adopted and 2 under risk assessment. And these, as you can see, there is a whole array of species afterwards, like Locusta, the Alphitobius diaperinus currently under assessment, the Grilodes sigillatus, Hermetia, and also the honeybee drone from Apis mellifera. So you see there is a very varied spectrum. Now, I'd like to stress out the numbers that you see here are actually the numbers of whole insects. So this is actually also in line with what we were expecting, so that at the beginning of the new implementing regulation for novel foods, we were expecting more gross type of products. Allow me to say that. And then we were expecting a second wave, which includes more refined products. And in fact, we are also seeing and receiving different types of products, which are not included in the first type. These are still animals or part of the animals, but they include more refined, indeed, products. such as defatted or defatted Acheta domesticus, protein powder from Diaperinus, or protein concentrates. So these are derivative products, and we are also getting prepared also for the next phase in which we can expect also perhaps fat or protein isolates or fiber or other particular products derived from these animals. To move into the risk assessment side, definitely we have to keep in mind that EFSA performs the risk assessment based on two major things. And one is whether the novel food is safe under the proposed conditions of use. And then secondly, whether the normal consumption of the food, out of novel food, will not be nutritionally disadvantageous. And we do so by evaluating a set of particular aspects, including, as you see on the right of the screen, the identity of the novel food, the production process, very important, the compositional data, the specifications, the history of use, the proposed uses and use levels, the ATME, or the nutritional information, the toxicological information, and last but not least, the allergenicity. I will just focus on a few, and then we can also take questions on the rest, if there is any. So the identity-wise, although it may seem very obvious, but a precise taxonomical classification is really very much essential. And so far, we have struggled with some of the applicants in the naming. Okay, so for instance, there is a tendency to use and include the word crickets versus Acheta, or grasshoppers versus locusta. So for us, and also for the Commission, of course, it's very important and trivial to have it right at the species level. Then second of all, there is an important aspect is the colony, the origin of the colony, of the rearing colony, and the identification type. So far, EFSA has been accepted species certified, so the identity certified by certificates based on morphological aspects of the insects. But we do not exclude in the future with more advanced techniques that we may be perhaps looking more into molecular identification, and this is not very far-fetched, particularly when we move more into refined products. And then also the stage of development is very important at the time of harvesting. For instance, Locusta, I'm bringing here an example. For Locusta, for instance, you know, due to the density dependent of polyphenism, Locusta may exist in solitarious and gregarious phase, and these may be different in terms of morphological aspect, but also in terms of compositional data. So it's very important for us to know the exact stage of development. So moving into the production process, this is one of the main pillars to look at. Of course, EFSA needs to evaluate and perform a risk assessment, knowing all the production steps involved. For instance, as an example, we realized recently that containers perhaps that are used to accommodate the insect during rearing might be of plastic, made of plastic. So there might be a chance, for instance, that with the insect legs, particularly the large insects, they may scrape the containers, and so plastic particles may be ingested by the insects, and they may also be ingested by the human afterwards. So it's very important that we look at all aspects. So although we may ask too many questions sometimes, but it's very mandatory for us to to consider everything and all aspects. And this is also true for veterinary drugs or for feeding substrates. Anything that is in the feeding substrates, of course, as you know, is translated into the insect composition. We divided the risk assessment of the insects in two main phases. One is the pre-harvesting, because we are assessing the source of the novel food, and then is the post-harvesting, and this includes the processing itself, so the novel food, the final stage of the novel food processing. We also, of course, need to know and get all the information on the processing steps after killing, and this may include killing or may include high temperature treatment, drying, and so on. And you may realize that this is very important. For instance, thinking of a high temperature treatment, when applied, there might be some instances of, for instance, acrylamide formation. So it's important for us to know the differences, also the precise ranges. Although then we don't really publish these values if there is data protection and confidentiality. In terms of compositional data, very, very important. Here, I'd like to stress the fact that insects are considered as whole foods by the definition given in the reference here. And that means that not all constituents can be fully identified or characterized. To spell it out more, what this means is it basically is not, if you take a sea salt, for instance, you basically know 100% that there is sodium chloride and some impurities. When it comes to insects, although these may be fractions of insect, it's not really possible at the moment to fully characterize the composition. Therefore, what we do is we ask, and we need to know the most of the composition. So we ask the majority of compositional data, and we expect the composition to add up to 100. So, and this is more gross in terms of protein instead of the types of proteins and so on, fat and so on. For moving into the variability, we all know that the compositional data or the composition itself of the insects may vary due to several factors, including feed or rearing conditions or other aspects. And here the panel has acknowledged that there might be this variability dependent on some factors, also based on the literature available. And when this happens, it hasn't happened so far in a physiological manner. So the variability is still within some limits. But when there is high variability, there is a chance that the working group and the panel asks perhaps more than the normal baseline of 5 batches, batch-to-batch analysis, for instance. So it's important to notice that we acknowledge that there might be this variability, but we also have counteracting acts to see whether everything is under control from the applicant side. We also acknowledge that unfortunately, there are no official methods, particularly for chitin. I just made an example of chitin here. So far, we accepted the dietary fiber analysis or the recently developed, some of you may be aware of the detergent fiber or minus the detergent lignin so far. But we very much welcome the development of new and more precise methods. History of use wise, it's one of the pillar of the assessment, because if not available, unlocks a whole new set of data that may be requested in terms of toxicology. So together with the composition is very, very important to have a proper provided history reviews. And it's also important that this is species specific. And we often see that applicants tend to, of course, provide as much information as possible, all information of history of consumption of insects, but we rather would like to focus more on the specific species. For instance, there are research provided on crickets, while the application might be on Aceta, or Aceta domesticus, or grasshoppers or locust for Locusta migratoria. So you see that the range of reports or of information that are available online or on official documents is restricted, but it's also important we sort of stick to the species. So moving on to the nutritional information, also a very important aspect. The very largely debated protein conversion factor, nitrogen to protein conversion factor, we definitely realized that using a 6.25 to convert the nitrogen into protein may overestimate the true protein content in insect. And we also seen that this is likely species specific. So we have noticed for the published opinions a range of true conversion factor from about 5 or 4.7 to 5.6. Does this make a difference? Yes, it does, because scientifically speaking, we are about to reduce, if considering the true factor, we are reducing the amount of protein by 20 to 25%. So this might be scientifically significant. On the other side, we have considered the 6.25 to stick with the regulatory regime and the purposes. Also, moving into the anti-nutritional factors, as you see, I'm just giving you some informations in this presentation, but there are so many nutritional information that we acquire. And one of these is the anti-nutritional factors. For instance, you may imagine some factors may inhibit the absorption or also the bioavailability of some nutrients, micronutrients, for instance. We do so by preferably means of literature, but also experiments in the case the working group realizes that this factor might be present in high quantity, or there is any evidence in literature that for that specific insect there is some accumulation of these factors of some sort. And also it plays a lot of weight the feed that is used, because of course we know that the type of feed involves and influences the factors themselves, because that's where they are derived from, as there is feed, the feed is plant-based. So last but not least, I'd like to give you this information that we often hear the allergenicity seems a major issue, but actually is not. Despite what some may think. Basically, we all know that there are food on the market that are currently, they do have allergenic potential, but yet they are safe and normally placed on the market. This is also the case for insects. So EFSA has identified 3 types of allergenicity type, which does not exclude that the insects, provided all before are safe, they can also be safe due to allergenicity. These 3 types are, first of all, what is called de novo sensitization. And this means that an individual who is not sensitive or is not, does not have any allergy, for instance, to anything, let's take it as a case, this individual by eating insects may develop an allergy to the insect itself. And then second, or to the insect proteins primarily. Then second type, is the cross-reactivity. And this may happen to individuals who perhaps have more likely an allergy to crustaceans, mites, or mollusks that by eating insects and insect proteins, they may cross-react. And then the third type, which is the allergen type of allergy, the feed type of allergy. So everything that is fed to the insects may end up, despite all the processing, so degutting and processing, may still end up in the final product. And we have seen this is the case for Tenebrio and for other products as well. So what this means is, yes, there is risk of allergenicity attached to insects, but still, if everything else is considered as safe, there is no particular concern. Okay, I think I have finished. Yes, I very much welcome the questions.
Thank you, Domenico, for this very insightful presentation. Before I open the floor for questions, I would just like to say that upon approval by the speakers, we will gladly share today's presentations because we have received many requests in that regard. Now, starting with the first question, Domenico, that we have received, Peter Kürti actually asked if there is an upper limit of daily intake of chitin of insect origin in the EU. Can you comment on that?
An upper limit of chitin?
Indeed, yes, of insect origin.
Well, actually, the panel and the working group has decided to consider chitin primarily and solely at the moment with the current evidence that we have as a dietary fiber. So everything that applies to dietary fiber should also apply to the insects in this domain. So there is indeed the same derivative. I hope this answers the questions. So there is no upper limit for chitin itself, but if there is for fibers, yes, there is also for insects.
Great, many thanks. And of course, Domenico, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but obviously our sector is always very keen in developing the sector further, and is therefore interested in any potential upcoming EFSA opinion. So the question that we've received here as well, do you think we can expect in the near future any additional promising EFSA opinion on insect novel foods?
Well, indeed, we don't have a crystal ball. There are many steps before any opinion is adopted. So there is internal work with the working group. Then there is work with the panel that decides or not. So there are few steps. We have opinions setting on our side. Some opinions are being setting for a long time. And some, as you may see from open documents that are approaching the end deadline of our assessment. So some may expect they may be approaching sooner or later. I cannot disclose, of course, any of the internal information, but definitely it's also on our side to accelerate as much as possible. Also to realize whether there are some safety concerns that we have not foreseen or perhaps were not visible with the literature available. So there might be, or it might take some time. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for this answer. To be frank, I didn't expect a fully detailed answer because I know that you cannot speak about that in detail. Looking at the time, we have to continue to the next presentation, but as mentioned as previously, the open question, please feel free to come back to us with those, and we will strive to forward them to the respective speakers so that you will still get a reply. We'll now move on to the next presentation, which will be on the implications of the regulatory developments of the EU insect food sector. Bastien Rabastens will enlighten us on this topic. Bastien is the co-founder of Geminis, which is a French startup specialized in the development and distribution of edible insect products. Bastien has given 2 TEDx talks on the benefits of eating insects. Moreover, he is the chair of IPIFF's working group on food safety and consumers information. Bastien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. So I will start by thanking the 2 previous speakers. Thank you, Rafael and Domenico, for the nice presentations and the day-to-day basis work you're doing at the EFSA and at the DG SANTE. It's very important for the sector. So after the regulatory and the scientific talk, now it's more on the business side that I will intervene, talking today mainly about, once again, of course, the regulatory context, but also after IPIFF regarding the novel food process, then some word about the farm to fork strategy as an opportunity for the sector, and what we expect regarding the forecast and challenge who are awaiting us. So in the first 2 presentations, we have already heard a lot about the past regulatory development in the insect novel food field. And here, in particular, about the 2 insect novel food authorization, covering dry yellow mealworm and frozen and dry migratory locust. For our sector, this authorization represents very important milestone, since they will contribute to the wider availability of edible insects in the EU. And key for reaching this milestone was, and still is, a solid European Union regulatory framework on which EU insect food operator can rely. At the heart of this framework, the European Novel Food Regulation, as we discussed already a lot. And what we were waiting of this, it's simply the harmonization of rule as well as the predictability included in the regulation, the new Novel Food Regulation from 2015, are key for insect producers. Why is they key? Because they allow to insect food producers to plan their investment and marketing activity ahead. Because the European Central Authorization System running on the European Food Safety Authority as sole assessment body is very important. As Rafael mentioned, on the last Novel Food Regulation, it was in contrast to various different national bodies, so a lack of transparency for actors like us. Also, as mentioned, the transitional measure, including in the Novel Food Regulation, has allowed operators to keep the product on the market under certain conditions. That's also very important for the member of IPIFF. And the 2 previous presentations have as well touched upon many of these aspects, so I will not go too far on the regulation. But what we can say as the IPIFF is how valuable this kind of rules are. For example, when we take a look at the United Kingdom, where the Food and Safety Authority has announced that no longer apply the transitional measure and therefore has called on insect operator to take the product off the market, is a huge problem that we cannot expect to be on a ladder wide. So it's very important for us to have this harmonization of rule and to be able to plan our investments. Also, on the authorization, well, as mentioned earlier, everyone understands that the original applicant is data protected and their customer. But as I've seen on the question, it also means that other operators reaching a commercial agreement with the original applicant can put the product on the market, and it's very important. So, of course, the first insect novel food authorization have helped to establish modus operandi for regulator and producer, applicant, and has just helped to pave the way for an outstanding insect novel food application and enable further growth of the sector. That's very simple to explain. More novel food application we got, the more insect we can put on the market, if I have to simplify as it. Also, the authorization also sent a very political signal to initiate more European member states to apply the transitional measure, because as said in the Rafael presentation, it has been a point of complexity, and it's helping for us to have this stronger message from the EFSA and from the European Commission. On the last point, the first novel food authorization will undoubtedly reinforce the position, which have made the choice to apply the UE novel food transitional measure, and for member states, it's a big point. On the contrary, the argumentation put forward by several other EU member states who may have denied the use of the transitional measure on purely safety ground precautionary principle, due to potential intrinsic risk associated with the consumption of these products. And the big one is the precautionary principle, shall be regarded as weak in the context of the fifth insect novel food authorization. A little bit more about what is the role of the IPIFF in all of that. IPIFF, as you may all know, has not filed any novel food application itself through the posture. The purpose of the IPIFF is aimed at supporting all interested applicants, and it still is, by providing them with general scientific evidence. As example, for example, what you can see on the toxicology risk, or the information of consumption, and as well as legal and administrative support in the preparation of the application. So, for example, you can see some of the documents IPIFF have published. They are all available on the website. And you can see right now some novel food question, also some data about the market that is simply collection about poll of the member of the IPIFF. So do not hesitate to reach the website and the document if you need any document or any information, or if you want to go further to the novel food and edible insect-based products. Saying that, it's important also to precise that IPIFF is still welcoming new member and new dossier that are filed by existing member also, and it will continue in this way. Some word about the farm to fork strategy, because the regulatory development that our sector anticipates, since we believe that they represent opportunity for our sector, are closely linked to the farm to fork strategy. As you know, the farm to fork strategy aims to make Europe the global pioneer of a food system that is fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly. To reach this objective, the Commission has announced to amend the labeling regulation with the aim to introduce standardized mandatory front of pack nutrition labeling, as the one we may experiment in France or Belgium for Toulouse-Disca, for example. Insects being rich in protein, mineral, prebiotic fiber, dietary fiber also, as mentioned by Domenico, and vitamin represent, of course, a healthy and nutritious option for European consumers. We therefore think that this initiative could actually help us profiling your sector, showing that we are aware and are already contributing to Health Europe. But the farm to fork strategy also aims at promoting circular food business practices, and circularity lies at the heart of insect farming. So if you take a look on the upper left corner, it will start here, you can see that insect can upcycle products which will otherwise be discarded, avoiding food waste and loss. Insects can also produce values from cost and emission, generating a wide variety of products, ranging from high-quality ingredients, which can be used for food or feed purpose, to byproducts, which are relevant nutrients properly, not only protein, but also vitamin, fiber, fatty acid, and be valorized as fertilizing products. They are being reintroduced into the food chain in line with circular economy principle. Incorporating insects into our diet contributes to reducing the environmental footprint of European food consumption, and thus insect-derived food products are fully aligned with the objective of the farm to fork strategy. Some word now about the outlook for the sector. The previously mentioned development and factor present promising opportunity and allow a sector to have a very positive outlook. If we take the data we collect by the member, it's forecasted that the insect food sector will produce 260,000 tons by 2030. This includes, of course, whole insects, insect ingredient, and products incorporated with edible insect. So it's a total of products. In 2019, about 9 million Europeans consume insects and the derived products. By 2030, this figure is forecast to reach a total of 390 million of consumers. So it's a huge increase, and that can be easily explained by the novel food authorization we're waiting, and those also who are already here. Some important word also about the outlook for the sector regarding the forecast and the challenge. It's very important to understand that the novel food for us is not an end line. It's a starting one, it's a starting point, because right now, yes, it's true, there is a low availability of insect food product in retail. It can be easily explained with the previous development. If we take a look back, we have no clear regulation, no possibility to put the product on the market, or only on the traditional measure, whole insects. So it's important to understand that, yes, consumers have heard a lot about insects in the last 12 years, but it's still a new product. And we as a sector have a lot of work to do to educate and promote the benefits of eating insects to the new possibilities the novel food offers and will offer us. And we are aware that for many consumers in the European Union, incorporating insect food products into their diet is still a novelty. So how we go to the I tried ones to including insect to a regular diet? That's a very good question. And what I can tell you right now is, if we take a look at a recent poll that we have in France, we have approximately 20% of French people who are open to eat insects. And it's still, let's say, a beginning number, because we think that it will reach with more and more product on the market. But still, we have to keep in mind that even if right now the novel food let us a very nice field to put more and more products on the market, the first dossier was accepted is only from June. So it will take some time to be able to gain impact communication about all of this. So as already said by Domenico and Rafael, and in a nutshell to conclude this presentation, 2021 will stay as a major milestone for insect as food in the European market. It's also the opening of a new era, a new challenge regarding customer expectation and the acceptance of insects, a new regulatory challenge also as labeling or the organic topic, for example. But it's still the beginning. Thanks for your attention, and do not hesitate if you have any question.
Many thanks, Bastien, for your presentation. Very insightful. I open immediately the floor for questions. We have one by Raine Khalil, who is asking, can we find a database about recent consumption and production quantities of insect food products in the EU, especially after the authorization of some? You've touched a bit on that already, Bastien, but maybe you can say a few more words in that regard.
Yes, of course. Right now, you can find some data on the IPIFF website, of course, but the database needs still to be built because it's very, very recent. So, of course, we as the IPIFF are trying to promote this, and for example, to make some some echo to what has been said by Domenico and the EFSA. We are trying to organize something with the assessment of allergenicity and measuring the risk. So it can help out to build a database and see also how we can monitor that. And the IPIFF is doing a lot of work on this topic right now, to also participating to some project and call to project to be able to build something like that, and also still being on the top of the association who are monitoring that and gaining consequence of it.
I can absolutely confirm that. We have another question here from Camilo, who is asking, although insects are rich in proteins and contain valuable vitamins and minerals, we should be careful with health claims. The German Consumer Protection Agency evaluated in 2020 different insect products, calculated Nutri-Score, and many of the products on the market have a negative Nutri-Score according to this agency and contain lots of sugars. Can you comment on that, Bastien?
Yeah, of course, and I think it will be interesting to have Domenico's opinion on it. But you have to keep a clear mind on that. Sugar of insect or another sugar is not equal. So you have to see also that yes, you may have some fat into insect, you may have some sugar, but it is important to take it as a whole product and to see it that even if you have a not so good Nutri-Score, it's not taking the big picture of it, and it's not necessarily bad sugar or bad fat. So it's important to keep that in mind also, and it is important for the first development of the sector that regarding the farm-to-fork strategy especially, we take time to analyze that and see how insect products go through this notation, to not being badly not and being able to answer that. But yes, I can understand that, and also you have to keep in mind that the negative Nutri-Score is not always regarding only the insect but the whole product. If I take a very, very concrete example, protein bar, for example, yes, you can have some sugar on it because you need it for the sport or the activity you are doing, and this is the way the product is designed for. So it's normal to find that. But maybe on a pasta product or other product, you will not find so many sugar. So it's important to keep it this way and to be able to answer this question, because they are real consumer question and real consumer acceptance for the product.
Great, thanks a lot for your detailed reply in that regard. We have one more question with regards to the organic regulation on edible insects in the EU. The participant, Sarah, is asking here what the status is in that regard. Can you comment on that quickly?
Of course. So as you may know, regarding the regulation of organic, we need a cahier des charges to be able to certify something organic. And in this way, the IPIFF and the insect sector is working on it. But right now, we doesn't have the possibility to be labeled as organic because this certification process is not existing right now. So I hope, and IPIFF hope also, that it will go this way, but it's still on construction for organic edible insect in the European Union.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think in that regard, we can also expect kind of that the discussions will most likely restart in the upcoming year here at the EU level. Many thanks, Bastien. We will continue and move to our next presentation, which will as well be our final presentation for today. For that, we will move up the food production chain, since it will be given by Sebastian Emig from the European Snacks Association. He will speak about the European savory snacks industries contribution towards building sustainable food systems. We are looking forward to hear if insect-based ingredients can actually play a role in that regard. Since 2012, Sebastian represents as Director General the European Snacks Association, which counts more than 200 members coming from manufacturing as well as supplying side, as well as national trade associations. For several years now, Sebastian chairs the Food Drink Europe Diet Working Group, which monitors the health and nutrition debate at EU level. Sebastian, we are looking forward to hear your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Max. Open my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Indeed, as Max alluded to, I'm going to give you a bit of an insight from further down the value chain, so how potentially your products could fit into our sector, but this comes as the last slide, so a bit of a cliffhanger here. A couple of words first concerning our association. So we do indeed have the savory snacks manufacturers. We do have also the suppliers, which we incorporate in order to represent the entirety of the value chain. In terms of our size, to give you the order of magnitude here, we represent 80% of the branded savory snacks sector. And in terms of size, we're just a small splinter. If you see on the middle right side, we just represent 1.5% of the entire European food and beverage market. So even though you can see some big brands here in terms of intake and dietary intake, we do not represent that much. A couple of brands, a couple of names which you might have seen. I'm not going to dwell too long on them, but I'm sure every one of you sooner or later have had that already on your table. In terms of the products that we represent, so I've been approached very many times like, okay, how do you differentiate, snacks? What is for you a snack? So for us inside our organization, snacks is something very simple. So the final product is basically potato crisps, pork rinds, tortillas, baked snacks, salt sticks, extruded products, and they all come, as you might imagine, from very simple raw materials. So it's vegetables like potatoes, carrots, we have grains and wheat, so everything like that. Just a bit of oil, a bit of flavoring, and in the end you have then the snack in which all the vitamins, minerals, and the fiber which is contained in the raw material is still contained in the savory snack. In terms of how you can basically consume our products, it depends from market to market. In the southern hemisphere in Europe and also in France, it's more as an aperitif. In the UK and the northern part, it's more that people are on the hoof, meaning coming from work or going to work, they have this quick energy boost, or sometimes in the office just to open up a pack of nuts, to come across the gap in the mid-afternoon. To give you a couple of, I would say, insights about how the market is developing, and as I mentioned, we are not very big in terms of the dietary intake. It has shown that, especially right now during the unfortunately ongoing pandemic, the sector has been very resilient. So we are expecting until 2025 annual compound growth rates of 2 to 3% across the different European markets. Looking back, that has been actually the growth rates year on year that we've experienced for the last 20 odd years. So even though you have these very black swan years as we have them now at times, the market is very resilient. Two key drivers here, if you look now for the current market development and also in the near future, is, and the first and foremost is the snackification. This is a big trend where you can see that the traditional 3 meals per day are being broken up. So you see people are turning more towards this, away from this segmented daily intake towards more the grazing approach. So you have here a bit and there a bit, and everything balanced in moderation. So due to the snackification grazing, you can see that our products are fitting more into that daily diet. And linked also with the pandemic, but it's already a trend that has been going on for the last 10 years, I would say, it's health and wellness. So whatever kind of cohort you're looking into, and which is now being reinforced with the pandemic, people do look after their health more and more. So either you look on on the older cohort, sort of the silver tsunami, where you can see that people are looking for more protein intake. So cliffhanger to the last slide related to your products, or people are looking for more, reinforcing the immune system. So everything like that has been growing even before the pandemic. Now it really has taken off like a rocket, and our members obviously respond to those consumer demands. And you can see that this is an ongoing trend which will not stop. A couple of words, as Bastien was referring to the farm to fork, and a big part of the farm to fork is obviously the development of sustainable food systems. I would like to share with you just 3 slides of what we are doing as the European Snacks Association, as well as our members, in order to support development towards more sustainable food systems. And I'm going to divide it roughly into 3 pillars. So the first one is the raw material and raw material acquisition. The production process is the second. And then there's a third, which when the packs do leave the factories, then the interaction with the consumer. So first and foremost, again, the raw material. If you look how we are and our members are sourcing the raw materials, be it vegetables like potatoes or fruits or nuts, which are mostly then harvested in third countries outside of Europe, it's evident that we are working together with the farmers, and in order to maintain the livelihood of the farmers. And our members are really striving in order to improve their environmental sustainability footprint and to use the sustainable practices not only, as I will show in the next slide, within the production facilities, but already in advance. And I've put down a couple of examples here. It's via precision farming, water management, soil management. So they take the farmers with them in order to have the entirety of the value chain become more greener. In the second step, obviously now going deeper into the production phase, really in the factories, when the raw materials arrive and are being stored or directly then used, we're in the production process until they're then coming out, packed and palletized, shipped towards retailers. There are members that they try throughout the entirety of the process, optimize the use of the resources wherever it's possible, and to support the integration of circular economy principles. To give you a simple example, it's literally in order to look how you can reduce water usage, how you can reduce energy usage, how you can increase the usage of energy, which comes from, pardon me, renewable energy sources. How we can use, for example, wastewater from the washing of potatoes that is being cleaned. If you have potatoes, let's stick with this example, which are being brought into the factory, then obviously they need to be scanned if they're fit for our products in order to end up as a potato crisp. So they're running along a line, they're being sorted optically, and some of those which do not fit the size or they have other defects, they're being thrown out. Now, this has happened in the past. What happens now? They're being recircled. So basically every potato, depending on the setup of the factory, is being recycled several times in order to really get the final no, or maybe still a green to go to be used for potato crisps. So this is actually happening within the factories. And as a last step, going out then from towards the retailer and then interacting with the consumer itself, it's clear because we have been working on developing new products, on reformulating products which have been on the market for a long time. We've been working to improve the information on pack towards the consumers. So we've reduced, as I said, reformulated all the products and implementing new ones. We've reduced salt over the last couple of decades. We increased multigrain and fiber content. We reduced saturated fat contents. So everything of this is already ongoing and will continue in order to do so. For us, the key thing is here, and I'm repeating it over and over when I'm these kind of fora or also talking to policymakers, to NGOs or generalized press. For us, the key is here, snacking is part and can be part of a daily diet as long as the consumption is being done in moderation. So this is here the key. And we are strong supporters of that. Savory snacks, they are part of the daily diet and there are no unhealthy foods. They are only imbalanced and unhealthy diets. Because they have too much of something, it's not good. And it doesn't matter what kind of food we're talking about here. It has to be a balance and it has to be in moderation. And then we're actually good. Now, coming to the key slide, the cliffhanger is over. What is the future for insect snacks or insects within the savory snacks sector? As I've mentioned it already earlier. So health is a decisive factor. I referred to protein. Bastien and Domenico, you referred to protein in your presentations. This is definitely something that will be and can be considered now with the green light from the European Commission in the novel food regulation here and opening the doors. We will see that. So Bastien, I think you're very right in the approximations for the future market. It has already entered our market, but on a very, very small scale. But due to the fact that insects themselves, they do have a very favorable environmental footprint. They do have a higher protein content. And Domenico, thank you for the advice here, the 2025 protein reductions. We will need to look into that as well. But they have already a kickstart here. I'm pretty sure that we're going to see this more and more as an ingredient, either I think as a flour or as a powder. I think there is a way here, but we should not, and please don't take it wrong as a representative, that's such underestimate the so-called yuck factor, which still unfortunately, and I'm saying that really underlined, unfortunately exists in Europe. Insects are a staple in other parts of the world for hundreds of years. And I think we have to overcome that. I recently read a paper of one of the participants, just I was scrolling a paper she has issued from the University of Catalonia, stipulating that insects, especially right now due to the pandemic, are being seen as a bit more with a bit of respect due to the fact that people are more aware of the virus. And that's why, and I think it's very clear and nice in the conclusions of that paper, that the food safety regulation, the product labeling has to be spot on in order to gain more trust of the consumers, in order to tap into this really wonderful source of ingredients. Short and sweet, that's from my side, and looking forward to any kind of questions.
Many thanks, Sebastian, for this very interesting presentation. We have a few questions, again, with regards to the uptake of insect ingredients into snacks. You have touched upon that during your presentation already a bit, but against the background of the Farm to Fork strategy, do you think that indeed insect ingredients can make the snacks more sustainable, and how would you potentially communicate around that as a sector?
And actually, it's a good question. I think insects, as I said, with really very positive environmental footprint, they are a favorable ingredient to be used, which then has to be really balanced off against the labeling of the product in order to gain the trust of consumers. Yes, indeed. I think there's definitely an entry point here. However, I must say in the beginning, it's going to be really on a small scale. I know that I've talked about insect foods, insects into the savory snacks sector for some years, and everybody was waiting like, this is the moment, this is the year, this is going to come, this is going to come, and it's still on a very small scale, either even as a full insects being fried or baked and sold, as a full insect itself, or as an ingredient. And I'm still waiting for the kickoff to really have that on a broader scale. Again, in the beginning, it's going to be on a small margin going up. But I think the more and more people will get used to it, I think we're going to see a higher increase there in the next couple of 5 to 10 years.
Great, thanks a lot. So if I understand you correctly, this also means that potential future insect novel food authorisations could help in that regard and support this development. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. In general, this is now the possibility to raise questions that the audience might have to all of our speakers. So please don't be shy. Put your questions in the Q&A box. We have, in the meantime, actually received a question. I think that we could address to Rafael with regards to the potential extension of insect novel food authorisations that are data protected. Rafael, you've spoken in your presentation already shortly about this possibility, but it would be great if you could elaborate on that possibility a bit more in detail. How would that look like, and what would insect food producers who would like to use an authorized and data protected insect food product, what would they have to do?
Okay, there are two ways of, let's say, of using the data protection. So assuming that another food business operator want to play the same product on the market, and that particular product, I mean, now I'm referring to insects, they want to play the same insect on the market with this data protected. The first option is indeed, I mean, they could have a kind of contractual agreement with the authorized applicant. And this subsequent applicant has to submit an application to the Commission, in particular to make an extension of use. And the assumption is indeed that they will market the product in the same conditions and a specification as laid down in the union list of the novel food. So it means that they will not deviate putting away any single comma from what is written down in the union list. If this is the case, indeed, by providing a contractual agreement between the authorized applicant and the subsequent applicants, and of course an statement that indeed they will comply with all the requirements, that might be sufficient, because indeed we had to make a legal act where we will include in the column under the condition of use that another applicant had the possibility to market the same insect. The second option might be that the applicant, for example, want to extend the uses of the novel food, but they would like also to use the scientific data which is protected by the initial applicant. If the authorized applicant have an agreement with this subsequent applicant, they had to apply, but indeed it will be subject to an EFSA evaluation by it. That's the second option, because indeed it will, it will be, it may have, of course, it will be subject to a safety assessment by EFSA. So there are two possible options. But in both cases, they had to submit a request to the Commission.
Good, very clear. Many thanks, Rafael. We have a next question by Christian Lambert, which I think could be and should be addressed to Sebastian, who's asking, will we rather see processed insect products, in parentheses, protein and fat, or whole insects in snacks? Maybe Sebastian and Bastien could maybe reply to that as well. Maybe Sebastian first and then Bastien.
Thank you. Very quickly, I do think it's going to be ingredients first, because again, we're not very accustomed to eat insects as a whole. So in order to take away this novelty in our food itself, in the diet, I think it will be ingredients. So as a first step, in order to slowly wave yourself in order to increase the acceptance from the consumer, and then later on, I think for the time being, to see the whole insects, I think it will be more or less like when you go on parties and you're going to like, look, try this locust or something like that. So I think it will be ingredients first.
Great, thanks a lot, Bastien. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I totally agree, because on the forecast we have right now, we see that what is normally be the most sell product, and the forecast will be the derived product, and so the ingredients. But also on more specific on another end, we see that on my personal experience on the sector, that we still have a lot of customer curiosity about whole insects. And we were thinking at the beginning of our journey as an entrepreneur that it will end very quickly. And then 10 years after, we're still selling whole insects as a major component of the snack we propose. So I have also the obligation to say that, to compensate a little bit the forecast we had, but I think on the future, yes, it will be more ingredient, and because we'll see more and more transformed product, and we are also to keep in mind that we are not allowed to do so much more than the whole product.
Great, many thanks, Bastien. We have another question that touches upon the farm to fork and the sustainability initiatives included there. And in particular, and that's why I think it's a question for Domenico, because the question here would be if Domenico, you would see that EFSA will play in that regard a more prominent role in the future with regards to the assessment of food products, and here especially obviously novel food products, with regards to their sustainability credentials. It's to maybe Domenico, Rafael maybe can complement as well. Is that something that that EFSA will become active here in the future, or will it stick to the mere kind of health assessment of food products?
Thank you, Max, for the question. Indeed, EFSA's mandate is to assess the risk of a food, and particularly nothing else. Especially in the novel food area. You know, something that is the environment cannot contradict. So the safety of the environment cannot contradict the safety of the humans and of the European population consuming the food product. So we definitely are requested to do assess the safety of the insects in this particular case, and we cannot look at the sustainability or other concerns that may arise. I don't know, Rafael, if you have some more information on that aspect to complement.
Thank you, Domenico. I mean, indeed, I mean, we have a number of challenges ahead. So indeed, I think also Sebastian have very well defined, I mean, the situation on insect right now. But under this farm to fork strategy, in this alternative protein, because we need to switch to different proteins because based on what's going on right now. As I say, I'm totally agree with it's not like a food, but it's an unbalanced diet, and we need to move on to a very well balanced diet. But first of all, not every alternative protein can be considered a novel food. Secondly, indeed, is anything which has to be on the market has to be safe. And this is what totally agree with Domenico, that, for example, if this alternative protein are considered as falling within the scope of the novel food, indeed, we will, I mean, EFSA will play a predominant role in the context of the safety evaluation. That's a real issue. Now, about food sustainability, I think also my colleagues from different units, they're also working on a possible, let's say, provisions on how, I mean, this sustainability should, I mean, the food sustainability should be done in a short future. I mean, it's something that the Commission is working on it. Because indeed, we have to bear in mind not only about whether the food is safe, but also we need also to bear in mind whether that food is sustainable or not. And that is because indeed we will have an impact on the environment. And that is something that indeed it has to be, assessed in a future. I don't know whether in that case EFSA or somewhere else or need to be involved in this possible assessment.
Okay, very clear. Many thanks to both of you. And we have another question here by Raine Khalil, who is asking, and to some degree we've touched upon this issue already. He's asking, I would like to hear your opinion on how to overcome the yuck factor in insect food products. I think this is maybe a question for our two insect food product producers, Christian and Bastien. Maybe Christian, you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. I mean, when we're talking about food, we're talking obviously about culture, and culture has so many different aspects that we need to consider. I mean, one aspect that already has been touched upon by Rafael Perez as well as Domenico Azzollini is really the safety aspect. And I think these novel food approvals, they really help, because now there is an official stamp on it. It is safe to eat. And I think this is also a good thing, that there are indeed strict processes that those foods need to go through. On the other hand, it is also about letting people know about these products. And now, given this framework that we already have, it is really helping. And I mean, what we have seen in the past, new foods do take time. So it is not something that goes from one day to the next and then it peaks. And I mean, this also refers to what Sebastian Emig was really pointing to. It's going to be slow in the start, because we really need to get people accustomed to it. And something, and then I hand it over to Bastien, really that needs to be taken into account is really the emotional aspect. So we have the facts, which are food safety, which are the sustainability aspects. So these are hard facts, but then we also need to talk about those emotional aspects. I think these are also really important to consider when talking about food. Now on to you, Bastien.
Thanks, Christian. I totally agree with what you said, and I will add also that in addition to what you said, the education is also very, very important, because the yuck factor, we see it mainly on adults. When you do tasting and you take children between 2 years to 9, 10, they have not this yuck factor. They eat it as a food because they are not also the cultural you mentioned, but also the emotion who are, let's say, set by the adult and by the way we consume. So it's very important also to open the way to educate better and to let young children who will be the adult of tomorrow that this kind of consumption is okay and it's not something weird, something we do not eat, because the emotional side you mentioned is there is also the psychological side. There is a barrier when we talk about yuck factor, because you are not associating insect with food. You are associating with disease, with something bad, something who is not good to put on your plate, or something related to bad things. So it's very important to add the education and the communication. And of course, the more you are confronted to it, the more you are open to it. For example, if tomorrow you see insect at every corner of the street or in every retail shop, you may start thinking, hey, I should try. And if you have not taken the step before, it was because also the disponibility of the product is still low. So it's very important to take it as a big picture. And once again, I agree with Christian. The first step is to have a nice regulatory framework, so people can say there is a yuck factor, but it's safe, and it's the main and the first way to go into the process. And this is where the IPIFF have some a very important role to play, because as operator we cannot do that by ourselves, and it's very important to be aligned on that. But it's a very interesting question, because it's still unsure. I will say we have way to go through, but right now it's one of the main challenges, and we need to tackle it.
Many thanks. I think those were indeed very important points that both of you raised there. So thanks a lot for those detailed and interesting answers. Looking at the time, we are coming to the end of today's webinar. Please, if you do have still open questions, do not hesitate to forward them to us, as mentioned earlier, to the email address info@ipiff.org, and we will gladly forward them then to the respective speakers, so you will get a reply to these questions. I think the take-home message of today's webinar is that the latest insect novel food authorisations represent major milestones for the European insect sector, which will have to be translated into market realities on the ground. However, these developments make us feel even more confident about our capacities to grow this exciting sector further. Above all, it motivates our association to work harder on providing local and sustainable solutions that are aligned with food producers and consumers' needs. I wish to thank you all for being active participants. And on behalf of IPIFF and its members, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the future, hopefully then in person. For more information about this event, you can check our dedicated webpage. And as I said before, this recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. I wish you a great Christmas break, and I hope to see you all back in 2022. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Thank you.